Hello, English students. This is Mr. Bauer. I am doing this video because, as you know, I'm not going to be able to teach you directly for Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021. All right, well, let's get started. This is for the Edge support class and the Insight support classes. Okay, I'm going to share screen with you. Now, I made a presentation on the next lesson. If you remember, we were actually in the middle of a lesson on the 5 reasons that English doesn't make sense. And I know I'm skipping ahead to the 6 good reader skills. The reason is because I didn't want to waste all of this time in video on a lesson I already taught you. Like, hey, let me just review. We can review when I get back on Thursday, okay? And by the way, on Thursday, we will be going over the assessment for the 5 reasons that English doesn't make sense. But I'm going to teach you the 6 good reader skills. And of course, we will not be assessing this until next week. So you'll have some time to watch this video and go over this material. All right. So today we're learning the 6 good reader skills by Mr. Blaine T. Bauer, MA. There are 6 skills that all good readers do. And I want to tell you, if you learn these skills, you will do better work, better homework. And I don't mean just in language arts, but also in like the really content heavy subjects like history and science, where you're learning all of these facts, okay? The 6 good reader skills will help you. Well, here they are. Number 1, predict. Number 2, infer. Number 3, question. Number 4, connect. Number 5, evaluate. And number 6, summarize. Now, you probably have a reasonable idea of what all of these words mean in just their English definition, but I want to talk about how we use them as skills to learn about reading. Okay, let's continue on. These skills are used mainly when you are reading a narrative. Now, again, a narrative is a story. It could either be a fictional story or a true story, but it's a story. But it can be adapted to all genres of reading, which are expository, narrative, and poetry, the 3 primary genres of reading, okay? There's a lesson that I'm gonna go into a lot more detail on how all these are different in the future, but for now, just know that these skills are mainly used in a narrative. Okay, let's go ahead and continue. Predict. To use clues to find out what happens next in a story. Now, I want to remind you, when you're reading a story, whether it's fictional or whether it actually happened, you're reading about something in a different time and place than where you're at right now. So in that time and place of the story, you want to find out what happens next in that story. And of course, not in your regular life, but in that actual story. So when one is reading a story, it can be hard to engage in the text and find it interesting. Boring. I mean, come on, we've all been there. I've been there too. I'm not going to pretend like every story is interesting. This skill helps you to focus on the plot of the story. Because let's face it, when you start worrying about what happens next, then that's when the story gets interesting. Like when you're watching a movie and you're like, no, no, and you're standing up in the theater, like, don't go in that room because they're going to kill you there. You get interested. Well, it's the same thing with a book. Okay, so if you look at this graphic that I have here, it shows that the skill of prediction is very cause and effect, okay? Cause. A dark cloud is going in front of the sun. Effect, it will rain. What's my prediction? Prediction is a good guess about what will happen in the story with clues from the story. I'm guessing that this dark cloud means it's going to rain, okay, in the next chapter. So let me go over the steps to predicting. Number 1, while reading, look for clues about the future in the story. You want to be thinking, okay, there's a clue. This is a clue. Number 2, compare these clues to each other, okay? Now, I want to just say this before I go on to the other 5 skills. The idea is when you're reading a story, you're going to need to take notes. I know you're probably like, Mr. Bauer, I don't want to write more. I thought you're teaching me how to do this easier. Okay, the writing will make it easier. It makes it easier to get better grades at the end of the story when you're evaluated on it, okay? So again, number 1, look for clues. Number 2, compare your clues. Number 3, when you find out something in a later chapter, you should check your notes to see if you were correct. Okay, isn't there a good feeling when you're like, I think this is going to happen in chapter 7? You're thinking this while you're still in chapter 6. And you go ahead and like, yes, I got it right. Okay. So when you find out something in a later chapter, check your notes. You might be right. Okay. And if you're wrong, well, you might be partially right. Or at least you can look at what was wrong in your thinking when you didn't get it right. Or maybe you're going to be right in chapter 8. Who knows? And this can be especially fun and useful when you're reading a mystery story. Mystery writers are notorious and they're geniuses at like putting in clues that you read and like you have no idea that that clue means something. And next thing you know, it's like, oh, yeah, I remember when that happened. But I didn't figure out in the end why the person died. Continue on. The next skill is to infer, which means to use what you do know to find out what you don't know. Now, inferring is very similar to predicting. The difference is when you predict, you want to find out what happens next, but when you infer, you just want to find out clues to help you understand the story. Like looking at clues like, why is that person always crying? What did happen to that person earlier before the story started? Okay, that would be inference. You're not trying to like figure out the overall thing like prediction. You're just trying to figure out what's going on. Here are the steps. Number 1, you want to pay attention to details, events, and occurrences in the story. Number 2, take notes on these important clues because you are the detective. You're the one that's figuring this thing out. Number 3, if something is unclear about the plot or other items, consider your clues and how they reveal the moral of the story. And number 4, logically use clues to figure out what is unknown about the story. And the graphic here with the little frog guy kind of shows you, okay? Evidence, what you already know, add them together, you get your inference. Okay, skill number 3, question, to ask why certain things happen in a story. If there's an unusual detail or occurrence in the story, I'm telling you, it's there for a reason. Like you might be like, how come all of the rooms in the house have no windows? That little detail is there for a reason because it's telling you to get out of that house because something bad's going to happen. Okay? But the point I'm trying to make is you want to question, like, why are there no windows in the house? Okay, so you can formulate and ask questions about them to realize the plot of the story. Now, there's a little note here I put. When you read weekly stories for language arts, first, I want you to read the questions in the end that you have to answer and turn into your teacher. Okay, the way that you will know what you were, this is the way that you will know what you were looking for in the story. Okay, so it's like super important. There's nothing in the book that says that you have to like read the story first and then read the questions, because then you got to read the story a second time to answer the questions. Okay. So the point being, you want to like know what it is you're looking for. Let's follow the steps to questioning. Number 1, if something is unusual or unclear, ask why it is that way. Number 2, try to formulate a specific question about it. Don't just say like, why is it so creepy? Ask the question like, why are there no windows in this mansion? Make the question more specific because I can guarantee that it's going to end up answering something more specific than not just saying, a word like creepy. Number 3, as you continue to read, look for answers to the questions that you made earlier in the story. Number 4, try to distinguish between the small questions and the big questions. Let me explain. The small ones are important only in a page or a chapter, but the big ones are important to the plot or the moral of the entire story. Now, I'm not saying that the small ones are unimportant, but I'm just saying try to distinguish, try to look between like, what's this and what's that? Is this just something related to just this chapter? Is this something related to the whole story? And lastly, number 5, see if the big questions can help you in the end to understand the story. Because that's really the point here. Okay, connect. Connecting is imagining yourself in the story. Connecting is one of the best skills that you can use to understand the story. Have you ever gotten lost in a book or even in a movie? That's what we're trying to do here. I'm trying to get you to read the story and get lost in it and just love it. In essence, you are becoming part of the story. So number 1, To do this, you need to pay close attention to the details of the setting and of the characters' descriptions. Okay, again, you're trying to unlock your imagination. Number two, you want to try to relate to the characters in the story. Now, I know sometimes this might be easier if you're reading a teenage story to relate to the character than if you're reading a story about like some old guy in a boat in the 1800s trying to chase a whale. Okay, but you will be able to relate and listen again as we go through each of the steps. Number three, the first thing that you really want to do in terms of imagination is to picture the setting in your mind. And don't be afraid to allow your imagination to run wild with you. Turn this book into your own personal movie. Okay. Number four, imagine you are the main character or one of the main characters. This will help you to feel what that person's feeling. Now, I know this can be somewhat difficult, especially like if the main character is a girl and you're a dude, or the other way around. Sometimes it might be harder to put yourself in the shoes, as they say, of the main character. But you want to do this. Number five is to pay attention to the emotions and feelings of the characters. Now you might be like, maybe I can't relate to an old English dude in a boat, 300 years ago, but you can relate to the feeling of being ripped off or of being angry or of being gypped one more time of the thing that you want most to happen in your life. Maybe you can relate to that sense of vengeance that that character has. Okay. That's what I mean by relate to the emotions and feelings. Okay. Also, you can feel what they are feeling. When you can feel what Captain Ahab is feeling in the story, then you've actually made it. Okay. And that's the point that I'm trying to get across. Sometimes you have to like push through some of the details and old language and other things that make books boring to kids and just get right to the heart of what that person's feeling. You know, feel their anger in your heart or their tears stinging in your eyes. That's when the story becomes real. And number seven, enjoy the immersion into the story. Okay. If you've like been angered or something like that and you're reading a story and you feel betrayed and you're reading a story about betrayal, just feel what that person feels. I know that could be a little like sick too, but the point I'm trying to say though is become that character, become part of the story. Number five, evaluate, and that is to form an opinion and tell what you think of the story. It seems that many students don't get to say what they actually think about a selection that they must read for school. They just answer the questions about the story. However, evaluating is something that we do automatically. What do I mean? We evaluate stuff all the time. Okay. I don't like that type of food. That top looks awful on you. Maybe we don't even say it, but we think these things. Okay. Mr. Bauer, you have a piece of food stuck in your teeth. So we're always evaluating. Okay. Actually, I don't. I just said that. But when you evaluate a story, you get to say what you think, even if it is negative. Now, sometimes when you're reading and you have to write an answer and turn it to your teacher, you might not want to say something negative because you're thinking, oh, I don't want to, I'm supposed to like this. You're not supposed to like it. You're supposed to understand it. Okay. And if you don't like it, then part of understanding it is saying, I don't like this. Okay. Let's look at the steps. Number one, as you read, take inventory of what you like about the story. Number two, also take inventory of what you don't like. Number three, as you use all of these skills to understand the story, determine if the writer did a good job in communicating the moral of the story. In other words, if the writer did not do a good job, you get to say, hey, that writer did not do a good job. Number four, check to see if the parts you don't like were important to the story or were they just in the way. I remember when I was in college, I read a story in like 2 whole chapters was just background information that I've just found incredibly boring. It was driving me crazy. But later it started to make sense because even though I didn't like it, those details were super important and made the rest of the story better because I needed to know that to understand what's happening next. Okay. So after you finish, use the inventory, which is your notes on the story, to help you form an opinion about the story. And number 6, when you form your opinion, be specific and logical in your evaluation. Which brings me to number 7. You want to avoid cliches and empty arguments. Okay. So don't just write, oh, well, this book sucks because it does. Okay. So you used a cliche, you said sucks. And you're like, well, why does it suck? Well, it sucks because it sucks. That's F. That's like the dumbest argument ever. Okay. Be specific. Like, I didn't like this story because I felt that there was too much dark imagery, or I felt that it was anticlimactic because when it got to the end, there's all this buildup, and then it was just like, oh, a letdown. Like, it doesn't really like tell you what you want. Or I hated the ending. I thought that the couple should have gotten together, not broke up. If you hate the story, there's a good reason why you hate it. So tell me. That's what I want to know. Okay. Now let's go to the last skill, and that is to summarize. To summarize means to retell the plot without the details. To summarize as a good reader skill is different than writing a summary for a book report. In other words, it's more about recognizing the plot than it is about writing the plot. Okay. So I'm not so interested in you writing a summary. I'm interested in you telling me what happened in the story. Now, if you look at this little graphic here, it just shows you the main idea kind of tied to the important details, not the unimportant ones, make the summary. Okay. Now let's go ahead and look at the different steps. Okay. Number 1, you want to pay attention to the themes and overarching ideas of the story. Mainly the things that like really the story's about, not so much just like this little thing that happened in some chapter. Number 2, you want to take notes on those big ideas. Number 3, when you finish the book, compare notes from different chapters or sections. Number 4, I want you to compile your notes together, either mentally or in writing, to tell the plot of the story. Number 5, this one's important. When asked, be able to say out loud what the story is about. Okay, if you can say it, then I think that's more important than writing it. Number 6, make sure that you don't focus on or retell too much detail, even if it's your favorite part. Like, you may have loved this humorous part where cake was thrown in the guy's face, but if it's not important to the rest of the story, you should leave that out in the summary. And number 7, be able to express the moral of the story. And in case I didn't say that before, the moral of the story is the lesson that you learn when you read the story. Whether it's fictional or whether it's true, every story has a moral. So there's something that the writer wants you to understand. Okay? So that's summarize. Now, let me just summarize about all of this that we had learned. Okay, so here are the 6 good reader skills. Predict, to find out what happens next. Infer, to use what you do know to find out what you don't know. Question, to ask why certain things happen. Connect, to imagine yourself in the story. You got to use your brain, you got to use your feelings there. Evaluate, to form an opinion and tell what you think of the story. Yes, you have a license to do that. And to summarize, which is to retell the plot without the details. Okay. I hope that you understood this and that you really felt part of the story. And thank you very much.